agenda. Mr. Miller, do you mind doing the prayer and the pledge, please?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this wonderful day. We just praise you for the mighty God you are, and just thank you that your ways are higher than ours. Lord, just guide and direct us here this afternoon as we discuss the matters of the city. Lord, just pray that you would just allow us to have your wisdom. Just guide us, and Lord, just be with each of the citizens of this town, Lord. Just bless each one and just guide us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Amen. Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first item is discuss, possibly approve the minutes of the February 10th, 2025 meeting, which are included behind the agenda.
I so move.
There's a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Jake, you do the vote?
Miller,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Sorrell,
Yes.
Dirk.
Yes.
The next item is discussion and possible action regarding an agreement with Ray Bingham Productions for the Bluegrass and Barbecue Festival that is in front of you. Basically, what the festival committee has come up with is using Ray Bingham Productions to contract with the talent for the upcoming Bluegrass and Barbecue Festival on October 17th and 18th. Ray and Brett would work out the terms of the contract and bring that to the committee to review. Their fee for that is 10% of the contracted artist terms, and then they will also work with us on production and staging needs for the festival, and on that it would be a 5% fee. This is something that we did not pay for last year. That was handled under the festival agreement we had with that group. In looking at how that ran last year and seeing the different terms that can come up in these contracts and discussing amongst our festival committee, we felt that this was a reasonable thing to pay for. We spent about $44,000 last year on talent, so 10% of that would be about $4,400. The stages, we spent about $22,000, so we'd have a couple thousand in expenses for their services with that. But for something the size of what we're putting on, having somebody that negotiates those contracts and goes through them, one thing that we've talked about with Brett is when he's negotiating with them, if it's a $6,000 fee, he usually tries to negotiate that down to $5,500 or something, which typically what he sees is that offsetting what the cost would be if we just called them directly. So, Zach, Bridget, you were both part of that discussion. Do you have anything to?
No, I think it's a wise choice to do that. He's got a pretty large network in that, and understanding how that works. And, there was a lot of the paper chasing last year on our side. So if he takes care of all of that, it's well worth letting him do what he does.
He is local. Bingham is from Claremore. They've done this for several years. They do a lot of different festivals around Oklahoma. They've booked a lot of the same talent that we've talked about for our festival. They do a lot of the bookings for the Coleman Theater in Miami. So they're familiar with the local talents. They're familiar with national talents. Zach, I can't remember the name of the band.
Texas Playboys.
Texas Playboys is who he's commonly booking at places in Oklahoma. I think he was
Canes.
just on a 9-day straight tour with them through parts of Oklahoma. Thoughts or discussions?
I guess my only question is to make sure who has control of the final contract with the artist, because this just says we'll consult with the event committee, which I assume is you and Main Street and the mayor and
In the chamber.
And then it says we. I'm assuming we to him means Brett Bingham. It says we will then negotiate pricing and other terms associated with the artist targeted for the festival Once terms with each artist are agreed upon, Ray Bingham Productions will contract with all the artists. I'd like to see them make clear that the contract will come to us too first for approval.
No, the contract is with Ray Bingham.
Okay, but when he's negotiating, I mean, as you said, we had certain expenses. We hope we meet the same kind of expenses. I don't want him to go negotiate with somebody and say, I have $100,000 contract with
no,
them.
no,
I have
it's-
100 with them, I have 50 with them. And I don't see anything in here that prevents that.
Those would have to come through the festival committee
And
before there was any contract, and we can put that
I would just
in
like,
there.
yeah, I just think that needs to be clear.
Sure.
That's the attorney in me coming out, so,
Well, thank you for that input.
I'm not quite sure how we word it, but I just,
So can we just add that, we'll work with,
well, the committee, or, because I take it the committee's gonna report back to us and get the economic trust approval. But somehow it's that the artists, who the artists are and cost, you know, before the contract is entered into are gonna be
so
approved.
we've already done that with the approval to do the festival. We set the budget at 75 with 44,000 for the, 44,500 for the entertainment.
Okay, then
So as
maybe-
long as it's within the 44,500.
Yeah, so maybe this contract should just reference that understanding and that the limit on the contract, on the artist is that amount and can only be changed with approval by the Economic Development Trust Authority. I mean, because if we find somebody we really want to have, you know, a big name and it, you know,
Correct.
we want to leave ourselves open to be able to do that.
We can do that.
So can I make a motion to go forward with the agreement with Fred's changes?
I think so.
I'll make that motion.
So we're amending the motion to include that we should add to the contract that the budget is 44,500.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, is the limit on artists, subject to, can only be increased, subject to the approval of the Economic Development Trust Authority.
Okay, so we have a motion with that additional language.
I'll second.
In a second. Okay, Jay, if you would take the vote.
Anderson,
Yes.
Sorrell,
Yes.
Darr,
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Okay, the next item is discussion and possible action regarding an expenditure in the amount of $200.34 for printing expenses related to the Aquatic Center funding study to be paid with previously approved funds for Swanson House which were not spent. So when we did the funding study for the pool, or for the Aquatic Center, we included a provision that allowed us to pay for the expenses of Swanson House if they traveled any. We did not use the majority of those funds, but what we did do was there was some printing in our motion back then, did not include specifically to pay for that printing. So we have $4,346 left of what we had allocated for the funding study. And if acceptable, I'd like to pay the $200.34 out of those funds for the printing.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Jay?
Sorrell,
Yes.
Darr,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes. Okay, the next item is number 5, discussion regarding the tower located on the premises of 41 North Elliott. So at a recent city council meeting, there was a presentation for a new lease on and it's in your packet, Branch Towers 3. A new lease for the property that the tower sits on here at First Street and Elliott. In that kind of triangular piece. So you have the original contract in your packet and you have the proposed amendments to it. At this point, it is just a discussion. We're still gathering the information, but I wanted to get this to the trustees to look at and go through and And I know that Scott said he's familiar with the people at Branch Towers, so we will probably have him reach out to them and start that discussion from the EDTA's perspective. But council was presented with this, and they felt that since we had handled the property sales on other pieces of property for the city, that they would like us to take a look at it and see if this is in the best interest of the city, or if there's some other things that could be addressed in this agreement. Just a couple of things to note on it. The original contract is for 50 years. It was written to where there was an initial 5-year term, followed by 9 subsequent 5-year renewals each time, and it escalates by 10% each time that renews for 5 years. Currently, they're paying $660 a month. At the next renewal, that would go up to $726, and it would do that every 5 years through that entire 50-year term. At the completion of that 50-year term, they would pay a total of $573,744.18 to the city. What they're proposing is, from this, is a 99-year lease to replace that 50-year lease, or the remaining 41 years, and that they're proposing to pay $177,000 in exchange for that. There's a time value of money to that transaction. Those are some of the transactions we need to go through and look at. I know some of the questions that initially there probably are is, why is it going from a 41-year remaining to 99 years? What's that consideration difference? There's the concept that the $177,000, the city would then have that to invest in CDs to provide a return. Right now, to get something equivalent to that return, it's about a 4% return for what they're paying monthly now. But there's a lot of analysis, I think, to do this and do it in the way that the city council asked us to do it. So that's one of the reasons it's not just an immediate something on the agenda to say yes or no to and pass back to city council. I think we do need to ask those questions. I think Scott has that contact, and having him reach out and ask some of those questions. And I know one of the things that Scott mentioned is that in this original agreement, it says that they will maintain the hidden park, which is over by Jefferson Elementary. And there's some question about whether they're doing that, if that was at some point dropped out of the renewal, or where that's at. I know there was maybe some indications that one of the parties thought that was still being done, and that they had hired somebody, and if that lack of communication is just fallen off and he thinks it's being done and it's not being done, we need to address that. And that's something that is not addressed in the new lease. So if it's something that we want to have go forward, then we need to have that discussion with him. And I've talked briefly with Mayor about that, and letting him know kind of where we're headed with some of these questions. So any initial, I know you just got it to look at, but any initial discussion or thoughts on it?
Well, these antennas were on the water tower on Elliott, and their MUB needed them off of there. And so that's why we looked at Hidden Park to put the tower, and that's why that's in there. And that didn't work out, and I think that's when somebody, I think it was Drew Stott, said there was that little piece there that they have the tower at now. And that's why the tower's there, so. But they were on the water tank, and now they're on the tower.
Zach, anything that you'd like to add?
No, they've been, just so you're aware, pretty much since we all took our seats in May of whatever, a couple of years ago. Branch has been pretty aggressively on this, trying to push for this. We've not been it's not been a fast priority. And then we finally got to the point where it was like, all right, we'll put it out there for discussion. And that was the whole reason that it came to council, was here's the number that they're at right now, this 177, and I think it was originally at like 120 was their first offer. And we just told them, we're like, look, we're not even gonna talk till you're over 170. So that just kind of got the ball rolling, put it out for council to discuss, and this is where we're at today. So no agreements have been made, no commitments to anything. Long-term, it's kind of apples to oranges. The immediately releasable funds, like you said, we would be investing, whereas the $600 that we get now, I think it actually is supposed to be like 600, but they're paying like 666 and some change. It's really an odd number that we don't know, where they got to that, but that's what they're paying. I know our other towers pay differently, but yeah, no commitments have been made on anything. So
Do you know if is it the same company that has the other towers, or is that the only
it is
one?
not the same.
Okay, well, I mean, that's just a discussion to let you guys know that the council has asked us to look at this. And that's-
It's a matter of economics, quite frankly. And I think we can run the economics like you've done to a great extent already. And Scott looking into if there's some areas of the lease that have changed, to ask why. But I would guess, and I haven't looked at it, that the majority of the lease probably hasn't changed. It's probably staying the same. And they're trying to save some money in the long haul. It's trying to, so we can provide the economics, but we can't make a decision that the council's gonna have to make. I mean, the 177 or what they wanna pay up front and invest it and take that investment, that only works if you do that. Or if there's, oh my gosh, we need that 177 and it's gone. I mean, now you're getting nothing for the next 99 years. So we can run the economics and we can say, here it is, but we can't make the decision that you all need to make of what's it, we have monthly coming, I don't know what you're using the monthly income for right now. That may be important. Or could this be a source of income for some of the other questions that are coming up for maintenance of buildings and things like that? This may be an opportunity to create some funds for that. So I think we can run the economic decisions, but we can't make the decisions on how to use that money.
I think that's what the council is looking for,
Right.
is a written economic
Yeah.
discussion that says, here's where this is, here's your,
Correct.
2-3 options with it. And I will say, along with what you're saying, that it gets them out for $177,000 and puts all of the burden on the city of investing that and making
Correct.
sure that they're getting a return. And, a 4% return today gets close to what the city is
Every month.
earning. But in, say years 10 through 15, when they're getting 8,700
Exactly.
a year, now you're looking at having to get a 5 or 6% return
Exactly.
in order to get that same amount of money. And that gets harder and harder. Traditionally, returns have been pretty stable. But you take the last 10 years when, just since COVID really, when rates kind of went up a few years after that, before that, rates were historically low. So I think one of the things that we will send back to council is a comparison chart of what Fed funds, of what T-bills and CDs have done, over that same time period. So they can see, yes, historically, rates at 4% shouldn't be a problem unless there's something like it was from, 2008 to 2018 when rates were 50 basis points. That's where the real risk comes in. I think that's what the council is asking us to do, is send back something that helps do what we're supposed to do and detail out, here's the real economic factors at work here, and things like the hidden pocket park, or the hidden park. What, we'll probably get with Frank on that and see, okay, how many hours would it take you to mow that? What's that economic impact there or cost there to the city? And tie that back into this as well, so. So anything that comes up, if you'll, I would say, send that to Scott, if that's okay with you,
Yep.
Scott?
Yep.
And we can kind of funnel all those questions through Scott. Okay, next item is discussion and possible action regarding purchases for the firing range project and update. This is a project that, Mayor, you're gonna have to help me with this. But
I will.
Kind of started moving a little bit faster, end of last week.
Yes.
I've been in a holding pattern, so for those of you that may not need an update on this, 6 months ago,
Yeah,
5 months ago, the Cherokee Nation offered $115,071 to the EDTA for use in expenses for the firing range. So Councilman Smith had kind of done a lot of the groundwork to put together a proposal for a firing range or an updates to the firing range out on Dog Pound Road. And went to the Cherokee Nation and said, hey, we need some funding, to GRDA, and asked about it. And GRDA is doing a lot of the dirt work, or proposing to do a lot of the dirt work, and then the Cherokee Nation was providing a big chunk of the funding for supplies that need to be purchased. You know, they were pretty adamant that they did not want any of that funding to go to things like surveys and
Engineering,
geotech and engineering and stuff like that. But this is for, you know, the concrete, the piping and stuff like that. So the EDTA has been holding those funds, the $115,000. And last week, there was a little bit of movement with the floodplain review. And I'm gonna turn it over to Mayor to go through the rest of it.
yeah, so we got an email from Councilman Brown in his GRDA seat, not as councilman. Basically, this was on 3 days ago, so Friday. GRDA has finished the project they were working on in Salina, and their intention is to mobilize back to the gun range to begin and hopefully complete the project next week. So when he says kind of a snap decision, it was pretty quick. We've been kind of waiting and ready. In the meantime, there's been some things that we had to address. For example, the TAPCON files, those are the files that GRDA uses to upload into their machinery, and it automatically does, it's fancy stuff. It's like, you know, tells the bulldozer what to bulldoze. So looking at that, how much fill, how much cut they're gonna need, stormwater permit, floodplain permit, section 404 from the USACE, which comes from Bill Smith, our floodplain administrator, the wetlands, biological assessments, the earth change, DEQ stuff, all of that's been on the move and taken care of. I actually just today got the floodplain development permit, and I've got that right here. That just needs to be signed. There was a request for silt fence and drainage pipe. We weren't sure what we needed there until we reached out again. Now that we're on the go and we've got some final plans finally in place. So we got some pricing on that. Sorry, it's way down here in this email chain. But I wanted to kind of go through that pricing with you guys. So we're gonna need 200 feet of 24-inch heavy-duty drainage pipe. That's cost is roughly, and these prices come from Buddy at the street department. These are the current pricing. $5,980, $5,980 for that 200 feet of pipe. We'll need 4 end sections at $262 a piece, so that's a $1,048.96. There's roughly $50 in bands that'll kind of tie all those together, and then the 2,000 feet of silt fence is $900. So I think we were looking at just mathematically right under $8,000. So I think if we could get $8,000 to get those things purchased and get them here, that would be tremendously great. Outside of that, we're just waiting on to make sure that GRDA is ready. I know there was a lot of concern, and I really don't want to go down the rabbit hole of it, but there is a cemetery just adjacent to this property. That cemetery is property of the county. That's not something that the city has engaged in or done anything with, other than when the county came in and hauled out all those trees, we said, we'll take the trees and get rid of them. So I talked to Alva this morning and asked if there was some kind of snow fence or something we could put around that while this project is going. Haven't heard back from him on that particular thing, but we want to make sure that we preserve where that's at. Unfortunately, it is like right as the gate swings, that's where the cemetery starts. So I've taken the GRDA crew out there in their entirety, showed them all exactly where that line is. Don't cross it, don't drive on it, stay clear. So we should be good in that aspect. Floodplain stuff, looks like we're going just fine on that. I just have to sign this and then we're ready to roll. Any questions?
So just to make sure, this is the EDTA's role in this is just that we're holding the funds, that Cherokee Nation applied for this, or gave the EDTA to help fund this project. We don't have any, we're not maintaining it, we're not controlling it, we're not designing it. We're just the one that the Cherokee Nation said, we'd like to do this project, but we want the EDTA to hold the funds. And as those disbursements come up, to hand those disbursements out, and all that we've been asked to do is just not to spend those funds on engineering.
So that's the only, I mean, did they give us, that's just stipulation they told us, or did we get something in writing
No,
from
that
them?
was just a stipulation that they
Okay, and
verbally
so
told
we
us.
are in possession of $115,000?
Yes. Earning interest off of it.
Okay.
So that's what the money was, that's what the money was for.
Yes,
Is this
Correct.
right?
is this project.
So it seems if the invoices or whatever then were presented to us for this project, and once we have those, we can then approve the payment of those invoices.
Yes, and right now all we need to do is approve up to 8,000 for that list that,
Right,
Mayor
and I
has-
would suggest that the 8,000 be approved for payment on those upon presentation of the appropriate invoices up to $8,000 right now.
Okay.
I mean, don't just.
no, I agree.
So the intent was originally, we were gonna purchase them through the street department, and then the funds would reimburse the street department once we had all of the invoices and all of that done. That way we're not, like you said.
Yeah, and
just
I'm
out of the
saying,
blind.
just to satisfy the Cherokee Nation and the trust they've, apparently for some reason, they put in with us. I think right now, I mean, if that's what you're needing right now, I think we could approve the disbursement of that upon presentation of appropriate invoices for those services.
Correct, they would come back as a purchase order that would come through.
Right.
Is that your motion, Fred?
That's my motion.
So Jay, did you get that?
I'll second that motion.
Upon present, or,
We're approving up
Payment
to
of-
8,000 in expenses for the firing range, subject to presentation of those invoices prior to final disbursement.
So we're authorizing the chairman to make those disbursements.
are you ready to vote?
Yes.
All right, Derek,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Swordall.
Yes.
Okay. Next item is discussion regarding the Graham Community Building. This is another item that has recently come up, similar to the properties and the tower. I think we're heading in a direction that when something comes up involving property that the city has that could be utilized for economic development, they're asking the EDTA to take a look at it. Councilman Lamar is here if we have any questions on this for him, and he's, I believe the council had direction for him to be involved and work with us on this. But those initial discussions, and Fred was at the council meeting when they discussed it. I was in Disney World. So,
Yeah, I know.
so the concept is to look at the Graham community, look at its, I think I'm gonna say this right, Councilman, jump in, Fred. Look at its viability for rental, look at what changes could be made to the building for rental, to maximize the rental income and the economic impact that has. To include, I believe, also looking at third-party management companies that could manage that for rental and pay a fee to the city. I think those were all things that were on the table to be discussed. Is that?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more than that on the table, quite frankly. I mean, I think it's a discussion of the building itself, and this is where I think, Terry, you can help with the historical perspective of that building, and the intent of W.A. Graham when that was donated to the city, and there may be things in writing in that donation, because my understanding is there was some obligation on behalf of the city to maintain a space for public community gatherings. And as we discussed the other night, and has been discussed in the past, that's really the only location inside the city limits at this point in time, and I think that was my understanding, and I may be wrong, and that's why I think you can help. I think that was a big intent of W.A. Graham to do that. And if it is, I feel some type of obligation to continue that. And so I think it's not only these things, but I think it's also look at the condition of the building, the necessary repairs, potentially how much that would cost, and make recommendations on that. And what is the extent of the repairs that are necessary? I mean, does there need to be a full kitchen to comply with, maybe there doesn't. And so I think there's a lot of work that has to be done here. And so somehow I think we're gonna have to figure out initially too, what is the condition of the building? How do we do that? And what would it take to get it to where the intent for its use can be? So we have that kind of figure too. And then start addressing these things that Adam outlined. Is that right? That's my understanding.
Yes, we probably need to, this is just my gut reaction to this, is that we would we not need to sit down with like an architect, a structural engineer, start out with the structural engineer, go through the building, see what's sound, what's not sound, and then sit down with an architect about what we want to see for a design of what needs to be done to remodel it, give us an idea of things like that, but along the lines of a bare minimum of a structural engineer and architect, possibly.
Yeah, or I think right now it's important probably to have a structural engineer, and we've got to figure out how's this going to be paid for, and how much is this going to cost before you just jump out there and do it. But we have to have somebody like that look at it to see what is the integrity of the building.
Yeah.
And cross your fingers, maybe it'd be good, I don't know. But I think that's the first thing. And then I think as working together with the council and the understanding, okay, then what do we want it to become? And once it's become, then I think you're talking to the architect about what would be necessary. And once we get the report from the structure, we may not even have to talk to the architect. Maybe here's the repairs you simply need to do to utilize the space so you have a community gathering area, And I hope part of this project too, and I just say this as an aside, having driven behind the building over the weekend, hopefully we instill some pride in that building, because quite frankly, to show that we have an interest in it right now, we just take a few more gallons of paint to finish up the paint job on it and to put a new back door on it that would look like something decent and something we were proud of, as opposed to what's on there right now. I mean, so even small steps like that, that's just an aside. I mean, I just noticed that when I went by it this weekend.
Has the EDTA gone in the building and seen the inside of the kitchen area?
No, been a while
I know
since.
Ariana has seen
Yeah.
it.
Ariana and I have, but the rest of
Okay.
unless Scott, you've been in there recently or anything.
Just for Oklahoma. I didn't go to the kitchen though. Chris wasn't cooking.
Had the grant been successful to remodel the kitchen that we talked about originally, those back door and windows and things were going to be addressed in that situation.
No, I understand.
But yes, it does look bad. I do know that, for you that don't know, I'm just going to give you a real quick summary, but that building was built brand new in 1938, and it was paid for in cash by Mr. Graham to be used as the city hall and a community building for the community. Of course, back then, they didn't have other areas that we have now outside, like down south at the airport and the Mays County Event Center, etc. So it was the main place to come. I mean, it held high school reunions, it held banquets. I mean, full service banquets were, Chamber of Commerce dinners were there. They cooked the food in the kitchen. They had banquets for fundraiser things, community events. High school prom was held in that building. So it was used for many purposes over the years. And then as part of the Graham estate, when he died, in about 1960, they completely remodeled that building to the way you see it today, with Graham estate funding. The original top floor was the library, and the city offices were downstairs where the utility department was. And the front entrance that goes up the stairs was actually the fire department. There were fire department bays in there. And in 1960, when it was remodeled to the way it looks today, the library moved over with Graham Estate funds to where it's at now. They built the new city-county building to the next door to Fred's office, where the city jail, the county jail, the fire department, everything moved down there with the police department, the sheriff's office, again with Graham Estate money. And then they moved the city council chambers and everything upstairs in the city clerk, and then downstairs with MUB. And then they remodeled the banquet hall to the way it is today with the kitchen. So the last time that kitchen was redone was about 1960 or so. There, at some point, probably, I don't know, in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, the inside of the auditorium part was remodeled to the way it is today with some paneling and some other cosmetic changes, but it basically has not been touched really since 1960 as far as any kind of major remodeling. I know that in sometime between 1988 and 1992, I was on the council at that time, and the city had the entire outside of the building painted to, I think it was white, if I remember right. Gene Callison was the paint contractor. And then that paint stayed on there until, I don't know, probably within the past 10 years or so, the Arts and Humanities Council got somebody to donate some paint, or maybe
It was through the
painted it brown.
Main Street program got
But the last, and I think that was kind of done by volunteer labor.
Yeah.
The last professional paint back between 88. Needs a few decades.
I think it would get determining the structural integrity. Wow, you know, or we could go get the more gallons of paint and finish it up and put the new doors on. But if the structural integrity isn't there, so to me, the most important thing is determine the structural integrity first.
And I think the city has some contacts. We can use PDG for some of that. Bridget, Main Street has some resources that we may be able to use as well that may not have some expense with it or large expense with it to help look at some of those building structures, right?
Yes, we have resources, and especially through the Oklahoma Main Street.
So there's those avenues when you talk about, you know, funding and how will we pay for that. So those are avenues that we'll be looking at. I know Bridget probably held the last large banquet in there, and you had your farm to table in there that you said went very well.
It did. It took a lot of work to really transform that space and hide some of those.
So those are, the reason it's on the agenda is to let everybody know and to start that discussion and start that process. So this is something that I think will be on the agenda for several months to come. We may need to have some special meetings to address some different things. We may find that the resource that's available at a low cost or no cost may not be what we need. So we may need to approve some funding. We may need to ask City Council for some funding from some of the other property sales that we've done that they've put back for the Graham community and say, hey, you know, we need the ability to pay for this study. Can we use some of those funds? So it's going to be part of a larger process that I don't think the intention for anybody is to just rush it through
No.
and have a quick response and a quick answer. That's why there's not an action item on here. It's just discussion about here's what's coming. You know, I would like to hear what Councilman Lamar has to say and different things, so.
And another thing we need to be looking at, once we address this issue of its integrity, you know, what funding can be used for this? I think that we're discussion of that. I mean, there was some bond money that was there. You know, could that potentially be used for this building? Again, that's going to depend upon the wording of the proposal that was voted upon by the public. Is there the possibility that, you know, Main Street, you know, the money that was, you know, is the wording in there such that some of that could be used for this building? And I think those are things we need to look at too, to give recommendations to the council. But again, I think our first direction is determining the structural integrity of that building.
I do know that the kitchen itself is in bad shape, bad structural shape. I know that even if you did anything back there to not have a full-blown kitchen, but just some sort of serving area, food prep area, staging areas. The electric needs to be redone in there, the ceiling, the plumbing, and everything. So it is gonna take a lot of work just in that area for those areas alone.
Yeah, we've got again, for those who haven't been in there lately, we've got a about a 60-foot piece of ductwork that's just laying on top of the door, the service door. There's probably half of the rafters and joists are cracking and split in terms of collapsing down. The plumbing, we have a lot of corrosion on some of the bathroom plumbing that's either causing it to continually drip, things like that. You know, we recently had to address a gas leak in the building, where we found that when the gas lines were built through the concrete floor on the second story, they didn't sleeve them back then. It wasn't required to put those pipes through a sleeve, so the pipes went directly into the concrete. And so luckily we were blessed and we got out of that gas leak for about $1,400, but it was 10 different joints and a couple of valves had to be replaced. Ultimately, the smell was coming from the P-traps not being kept wet. And so, you know, nobody was in the kitchen for X amount of years. They got dry enough. You know what happens when they get dry, they stink. And then with the new air conditioning HVAC system, sucking more air than the old one did, it pulled out all that smell up through to the second floor. And so we had MUB in there. MUB ran their tester, their meters. What they could get was minimal. I mean, we're talking less than 5 parts per million. But it was ultimately those P-traps were just dry. So a lot of maintenance, daily maintenance needs to be considered as well. But when you get to that kitchen, I think that's really the biggest concern right now is the structural integrity of the ceiling in there is pretty much why we've encouraged it to stay locked and shut and everybody out of there.
And I believe some of the things that were done for the grant will include some discussion on the structures of that, the structural integrity
Correct.
of that back building. So some of the stuff is already there, but overwhelmingly, I think what's in the city's best interest is to stop nickel and diming it to death
Right.
with small Band-Aids and actually get in there and do a complete analysis and figure out a path forward, so.
Right. I do think it's obviously wise to figure out if it's structurally sound first. If we find out that it is, I just want to make sure I mention that when we went after that grant, there were several entrepreneurs that were excited about their baking company, and they actually need a commercially licensed kitchen to expand their business, and so it could actually create great opportunity for those business owners. So I just want to mention that it would be very awesome if we could, once we find out the structural part of it, if it's possible. And I do think it's wise to go through this process, because I think what we found ourselves with that last grant application is throwing it together super quickly so we could meet that deadline. I do think it's because of the lack of funding of why we got awarded, but I think if we can go through this slow process, because I think we're gonna have to get creative and phase it out as far as
Correct.
funding it. So we might have to fund the structure is one piece, then the kitchen is one piece, and so to do that, I think it's wise to go through this slow process. So thank you for bringing it before us. And so to be clear, with the first step is the first step to find out, go through the Main Street programs, and then if we find out that they'll just fund a fraction of that engineer coming to figure out the structure, would the EDTA be willing, or is it possible that we can spend some of our funds just for that first piece to see if it's structurally sound?
I think we need to see what the costs could be.
Okay.
And who is the right entity to do this?
Right.
Okay, right.
And again, I think that everything should come back to the economic benefit
Totally.
of what we're doing, and, you know, we're going to, and what I believe the council or some of the councilmen are asking for is, if we're going to spend $500,000 in a kitchen, how does that get returned?
Right.
And if there's not an economic return for it, is that the best use of those funds? So I think it's a request to not just say, hey, let's build this big, elaborate, glorious facility and get nothing in return. I think there's got to be an economic reason for why we're doing it. And what I believe they're asking us to do as well is say, here's an ongoing maintenance plan. Here's what it's going to, this is going to, and if it's $1 million to rehab it and completely do it, what's the ongoing cost for what it's going to take to maintain it? Okay, it's a $50,000 a year. Well, will it generate enough revenue to do that?
Right.
How does that happen? Very similar to the process that we're doing with the aquatic center. It's a great idea to build all this stuff, but how do we maintain it? How do we pay for it? And how do we make it an ongoing product that it's here for, so that when all of us are gone, somebody else is discussing, my gosh, why did they put that door on the back of this thing?
Yeah, I think it's basically looking for a feasibility report from us. I mean, who knows? You may have it looked at and find out the structure and honestly, you may have to look at the prospect of, hopefully it doesn't go this far, but you may have to look at the prospect of, would it cost less to build something new as opposed to take care of this? I mean, who knows? And we won't know that until we understand the shape that this building is in.
And another thing to consider is that when you talk about revenue coming in for it, that maybe right now, the way that building is and the shape it is, probably the $75 or so rent that the city offers for it is probably what it's worth, because it's nothing. But if we do remodel it and do get it back to its life, bring it back to life, we should stop being so cheap and get comparable with other rental facilities and rent it for what the going rate is, or, with other facilities instead of such a cheap rate too, to be able to generate that income to upkeep, because you just can't provide something and not take care of it, or have the income to not be able to take care of it.
Okay, anything else? If not, we're adjourned.